Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease as the jet descended over the city, its lights flickering like a sea of stars below. My mind kept replaying the crisis mission I had just wrapped up. Exhaustion weighed on me, but the thought of what I would return to, the mess left behind by Arthur's death, kept me awake, despite the deep fatigue in my bones. I'm Evelyn Sloan, 35 years old, a tech consultant by trade, but more than anything, I've always been a problem solver. It's how I got into this industry, how I climbed my way up, and it's how I found myself knee-deep in the aftermath of Arthur Dagan's passing. Arthur was my mentor, my guiding star in this chaotic industry. Dagan Tech was his empire, and for years, I was part of it. His right-hand woman, trusted with secrets, with innovations no one else saw. But all that changed when the call came in. Arthur was dead, just like that. No warning, no hint. I hadn't seen him in months. That mission I'd been on had kept me away longer than planned, but it didn't matter. Arthur was gone, and now, here I was, back to face whatever he'd left behind. When I walked into the penthouse, the sterile clinical atmosphere hit me immediately. The kind of cold, polished luxury only billionaires seem to achieve. Arthur had lived in this tower, his personal command center overlooking the city. His empire, his legacy, all built here. The meeting room was already set up, sleek white tables and crystal glasses, corporate professionals milling about. Arthur's surviving protégés were there, Serena and Miles, like vultures waiting for the scraps. They'd been part of his inner circle, but none of them had the history with him that I did. None of them had earned his trust like I had. I stood at the back of the room as they began the inheritance ceremony. Miles, the cocky startup CEO, looked overly comfortable in his tailored suit, clearly relishing his newfound power. Serena, the biotech exec, was already discussing the future of Dagan Tech, her voice clipped and authoritative. Then it came time for me. My name was called, and I stood up slowly, trying to hold my composure. This wasn't the way I wanted to find out. I thought I'd be part of the next chapter of Dagan Tech, continuing Arthur's legacy, even if not as his successor. Instead, I was left with this, a small square box. Inside was Arthur's old experimental drone prototype, something he'd been working on years ago, something I had been there for. It wasn't even finished. No intellectual property, no empire to inherit. Just a tech relic, a piece of the past. I forced a smile and accepted the drone, my hand shaking slightly as I held the box. I knew exactly what it meant. This wasn't an insult. This was a message. I stepped outside, the weight of the box heavy in my hand. My instincts flared. There was something more here. As I slipped into the corner of the room, away from the conversation buzzing around me, I began to examine the drone. The drone that had seemed so unimportant moments ago suddenly felt different. A hidden compartment in the side clicked open. Inside, nestled beneath the wiring, was a small data drive. The cold metallic drive gleamed in the dim light, and my heart raced. I pulled it out carefully, a sense of urgency stirring inside me. And there, lying on the bottom of the compartment, was an old photo. Arthur and I, standing together under the scorching Mojave Desert sun. A time when we had tested prototypes for what felt like an eternity, surrounded by sand and tech. It was a time before the corporate suits, before Dagan Tech became this cold business. This was a time when Arthur truly believed in innovation, in changing the world. I slid the data drive into my pocket and kept the photo in my hand, the warmth of the memory grounding me. Whatever was on this drive, it was a key. I could feel it in my gut. Arthur had left me a trail to follow. This wasn't just a goodbye. It was a challenge, and for the first time in years, I felt the fire ignite inside me once more. I didn't waste any time. I left the penthouse and made my way to the loft I'd kept hidden in the lower part of the city, a place I used for drops, a place that had seen the darker side of the tech world, the kind of tech that wasn't listed in portfolios, the kind of data that stayed far away from public eyes. It was a cheap, gritty building above a mechanic's shop, but it was safe, secure. And right now, it felt like my last shot at finding whatever it was Arthur had left me. I sat down at the old desk, pushing aside paperwork and a few stray tools from the tech experiments I'd once tinkered with. The laptop booted up with a tired hum, the only light in the room flickering against the walls. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I inserted the data drive into the laptop. The screen flickered for a moment, then went black. My heart skipped a beat, but just as quickly, 3 files appeared on the screen. The first was labeled Patents Fi 2, the second was Project Chimera, and the third? A voice memo. Serena meeting final.mp3. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't a simple inheritance. Arthur had buried something in here, something significant. These files weren't just random. He had left me breadcrumbs, like he always did, when he wanted me to figure something out. I clicked on the first file, Patents Fi 2. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the dates. These weren't just old drafts. They were a set of updated patents for projects I knew Arthur had been working on before he passed. Projects that had never seen the light of day. I scrolled down. There were updates, details on the latest tech iterations, but then I saw it, the signatures. They were doctored. The signatures on these files, the ones marked with Arthur's name, didn't match his handwriting. They were forged. And the more I dug through the file, the more I realized the obvious. Someone had stolen his work. A deep, cold pit formed in my stomach. I knew it, Serena. Her grip on Dogentech was tighter than she ever let on. There had been rumors when I was still there, whispers about how she was manipulating patents and altering the company's records to exclude certain projects, Arthur's projects, from the company's books. But this was more than that. She hadn't just taken control. She had stolen the heart of the company, and now it was all documented here. I clicked on the next file, Project Chimera. The name struck me immediately. I had heard Arthur mention it once, in passing, but he'd never explained what it was. The file opened to reveal a sophisticated blueprint for a drone-based AI system. A system that could think, learn, adapt. Essentially, a self-evolving drone. It was a game-changer, a technology that could redefine not just drones, but every facet of artificial intelligence. This wasn't just groundbreaking tech. It was world-changing, and it was hidden away, buried under layers of corporate deceit. I clenched my fists, the weight of what I was uncovering settling in. Serena had already started reshaping the company's future, but this was the last thing Arthur had been working on, the last piece of his legacy, and Serena had stolen it. She was going to bury it. I clicked on the final file, Serena meeting final.mp3. I hesitated for a second before pressing play, knowing it was Arthur's voice I was about to hear, probably his last recorded words. The audio started, a soft hiss followed by the unmistakable sound of Arthur's calm, measured voice. I know what you want, Serena, but I won't do it. I won't change the will, and I won't sign those patents over to you. I froze. My stomach turned. This wasn't just about tech. It was personal. Arthur had known. He'd known Serena was going to betray him. Her voice came next, cutting through the recording with a smooth, confident tone. Arthur, you're being unreasonable. I'm doing what's best for Dogentech. You're old. You're not thinking clearly. The board agrees with me. Arthur's voice was firm, unyielding. You're not the one who's going to carry Dogentech forward, Serena. Not if I can help it. If you push me into a corner, I'll expose everything. I'll take it all public. Serena's laughter echoed in the recording, cold and calculating. You can't threaten me, Arthur. You're already a liability. You know what happens to people who get in my way. The recording cut off, leaving an eerie silence in the room. I sat there, stunned, the weight of the words sinking in. Arthur had known. He had been fighting back, trying to protect the legacy, trying to make sure the technology he created didn't fall into the wrong hands. But he hadn't had enough time. And now I was the only one who could finish what he started. I felt the adrenaline rush through me. This wasn't just about money or patents. It was about protecting Arthur's vision. It was about stopping Serena before she buried everything for her own gain. I grabbed my phone, dialing the one person I knew could help me unravel this mess, Finn Vasquez. He was a cybersecurity analyst who'd worked with me during a mission in Riga, a guy who owed me more than a few favors. He'd know how to decrypt some of this, and he could help me make sure the files were secure. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. "Finn, I need your help," I said, my voice steady but urgent. "I've got something big and I can't do it alone." Finn didn't hesitate. "I'm listening." "Get ready, I'm sending you files. We need to get ahead of this, and fast. Serena's been tampering with everything, and I think I've just uncovered her endgame. Send me what you've got, I'll take care of it." I disconnected the call and uploaded the files. Serena wouldn't win. Not this time. Arthur's legacy wasn't going to die just because she thought she could bury it. This was only the beginning. The evening arrived faster than I anticipated, and as I entered the grand hotel ballroom for Serena and Miles's memorial dinner, I could already feel the tension in the air. It was supposed to be a somber event, a celebration of Arthur's life and legacy. But the moment I stepped in, I realized it was nothing more than a corporate spectacle. The room was lavish as expected, golden chandeliers overhead, polished marble floors reflecting the soft glow of the lighting, and tables covered in white linens with perfectly arranged centerpieces. The laughter and clinking of champagne glasses filled the room, but it wasn't the sound of mourning. It was the sound of opportunists playing their part. Serena stood near the front of the room, tall and poised, her designer dress hugging her figure as she spoke with several venture capitalists, her eyes always scanning the room for the next potential power player. She looked every bit the biotech queen, as if the tech world was her kingdom, and she was simply welcoming more subjects. Miles, of course, was the life of the party, leaning in too close to several guests, cracking jokes as they laughed too loudly. He had mastered the art of the charming CEO, playing the part of the affable, self-made millionaire who could do no wrong. And if I didn't know better, I would have believed it. But I knew too much about the corruption that ran under Dogentech's glossy exterior. I stayed at the back of the room, watching the interaction unfold as I sipped my drink, trying to maintain my composure. This was a game, and I wasn't going to play into their theatrics. As the speeches began, I noticed that no one mentioned Arthur's work. No one mentioned his passion for innovation or the incredible breakthroughs he'd made. It was as if they were erasing him from his own company, his own legacy. The speech was all about the future they would now control. Serena's voice echoed through the microphone, smooth and practiced. "I want to thank everyone who has been a part of Dogentech's success. Arthur's vision lives on in all of us," she said, her eyes scanning the room as she smiled graciously, like a queen delivering a sermon to her loyal subjects. "And we are committed to carrying it forward, building on the strong foundation he laid out." I clenched my jaw, unable to mask my disgust. It wasn't Arthur's vision she cared about. It was the empire she was about to inherit. Her voice faltered slightly when she mentioned Arthur, but it was brief, just a crack in the facade. She quickly recovered, as if nothing had happened. The audience responded with polite applause, but it was clear they were all waiting for their turn to speak, their turn to make their connections. Miles, sensing his moment, jumped in to add his 2 cents, the cocky smirk never leaving his face. "We're looking forward to pushing the boundaries of what we've built and taking Dogentech into the next era of tech leadership. Arthur's work was invaluable, but we'll be taking it to the next level." His eyes darted around the room, seeking approval from every corner, basking in the attention. "It's all about moving forward, right?" I took another sip of my drink, my mind racing. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a power play, a PR stunt to solidify their control over the empire. Arthur wasn't just a man to them. He was a stepping stone. And the worst part was that they were doing it right under the noses of the people who should have cared the most. I couldn't let it slide. As Miles finished his speech, I raised my glass and stood up, making my way to the center of the room with quiet confidence. I could feel the eyes of the room shifting to me, some curious, some calculating. I knew this was risky, pushing back in a room full of their supporters, but it was time. I cleared my throat and glanced over at Serena, who was still smiling, looking far too pleased with herself. "Arthur didn't just lay a foundation," I said, my voice carrying across the room, cool but cutting through the noise. "He created a vision that wasn't just about profit or market share. It was about creating something that could change the world." I could see Serena's face falter for just a moment, a brief flicker of discomfort before she masked it with another smile. Miles shifted, clearly thrown off guard by my unexpected interruption. "Arthur's last project," I continued, locking eyes with both of them, wasn't just a patent. It wasn't just some tech we could shove aside. It was the future of dog and tech. The future of innovation, so forgive me if I'm not convinced by your next-level speeches. There was a pause. The room held its breath. I'm just curious, I added, leaning into my words. What exactly are you building upon? Because last I checked, Arthur's final projects weren't even on the table. His work wasn't even part of the plan. I knew I'd hit a nerve. Serena's jaw clenched slightly, but she quickly masked it with a gracious smile as if nothing was wrong. Miles, ever the opportunist, stepped in with a laugh. Always the blunt one, Evelyn. We know how you like to stir the pot, he said, stepping closer, his grin wide and unbothered. But hey, that's what makes you so memorable. I didn't respond right away, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment longer. I was poking the beast now, but I knew I had to. They needed to know that I wasn't going to let this go. Before I turned to leave, I caught sight of Serena's assistant standing off to the side, her tablet flashing something in an encrypted message. A message she clearly didn't want anyone to see. I knew that look. And just like that, I had the confirmation I needed. Serena wasn't just trying to hide Arthur's legacy. She was actively covering something up. With one last look at the pair of them, I turned on my heel and walked toward the door. The message was clear. The fight was just beginning. As I stepped out into the cold night air, my phone buzzed. It was Finn. Get ready, this just got bigger than we thought, he said. You've got something big on your hands. I smiled to myself. The game was on, and I wasn't going to lose. The storm hit just as I was gearing up for the night. A rare, violent thunderstorm rolled in, the kind that made the air feel thick and oppressive. It was the perfect cover for what I was about to do. I stood in front of the Dog and Tech satellite campus, an unassuming glass building on the outskirts of the city, tucked between larger corporate monstrosities. If you didn't know it was there, you'd miss it. But I knew exactly where I was going. I had done my homework. Serena's backup office was tucked away in the lower levels of the building, secure but not unbreachable. I had seen her make subtle gestures at the dinner, things only someone who had spent years working in high-stakes environments would notice. Things that told me she had a routine, a security system in place. Her security was top tier, no question about it, but it wasn't foolproof. I could almost hear Arthur's voice in my head, reminding me of every tactic he'd ever taught me, every move to make in the world of R&D and corporate espionage. The key was precision, no mistakes. I checked my watch, 11:12 p.m. Perfect timing. The building was almost empty, save for the security guard doing his rounds and the cleaning staff who kept to the upper floors. Everyone else was at home, most of them anyway. I made my way to the side entrance of the building, tucked behind a small alley that no one paid attention to. The security guard at the front would never notice me. He wasn't paying attention to the side. I slid a small device into the lock, watching the red LED blink as it worked its magic. In a matter of seconds, the door clicked open, and I slipped inside. I moved quickly, staying in the shadows, my steps muffled by the thunder above. Inside, the air was cold and stale. The smell of paper and machinery lingered, mingling with the scent of expensive wood panels and sleek metallic desks. The space looked too clinical, too perfect to feel anything other than hollow. I wasn't here to admire the decor. The elevator took me to the 5th floor. I waited for the door to close, and then immediately tapped in the code I had swiped earlier that evening. The elevator hummed, its digital display flickering before it began its descent to the restricted area. I let out a slow breath as I stepped out, careful to stay as far out of sight as possible. The key was getting in unnoticed. I had only moments before things went sideways. The hallway stretched before me, lined with secure offices and empty storage spaces. I moved down it with practiced stealth, knowing exactly where I was headed. The locked room that housed Serena's private files, the kind she couldn't risk anyone getting their hands on. It took me a few minutes, but I finally reached it. Her office, tucked behind a steel door that was designed to withstand most attempts at entry. The access panel beside the door was a familiar sight, a touch screen with an embedded fingerprint scanner. It was high-end, state-of-the-art security, but not an insurmountable one. I pulled out the small device I had hidden on me, a piece of tech I'd used in the past during covert ops, a signal disruptor that scrambled the biometric scans. With a few swift taps, The screen blinked an error message, and the door opened with a soft click. I smiled to myself. The office was everything you would expect from someone like Serena. Cold, sleek, and filled with cutting-edge technology. But there was a single thing that stood out. The large locked filing cabinet against the far wall, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was all business, no warmth, no personality. It screamed corporate power, and it made my skin crawl. I approached the cabinet, taking my time, my heartbeat steady. This was the moment. I slid my lock-picking tool into the small opening and twisted, the click of the mechanism responding to my touch. The drawers slid open easily, too easily. The files inside were meticulously arranged, just like I'd imagined. Everything was categorized by project, by date, by code name. But the one I was after was near the bottom, Stage 5 licensing. I grabbed the folder, quickly rifling through it. It was all there, the falsified documents, correspondence detailing the attempts to forge Arthur's signature on key patent releases, and the internal emails between Serena and Miles. The evidence I needed to prove that their grip on the company wasn't just a corporate takeover, it was a full-scale operation to steal everything Arthur had worked for. I didn't bother taking the time to read through everything. That would come later. What mattered was the proof that Arthur had been right. Serena had been manipulating everything behind the scenes to rewrite Dagentech's future, and it wasn't the future he had envisioned. But as I closed the drawer, a sudden noise interrupted my focus. Footsteps. I froze. For a moment, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, louder now. The footsteps were coming closer. Fast. I darted toward the nearest exit, my mind racing. I needed to get out. I needed to move. Fast. The hallway was empty when I emerged, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Serena's assistant, a woman I had only seen in passing, was headed my way. I recognized her from the dinner, a quiet, calculating presence. If she caught me now, it would all be over. I ducked into a small storage closet off the side of the hallway, holding my breath. I heard the click of heels as she walked past, her figure illuminated briefly by the dim lights overhead. She stopped just outside my hiding spot, and my heart pounded in my chest. Please don't turn around. Please don't. The sound of her steps faded. I didn't move until the silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Slowly, I exhaled, my muscles aching from the tension. I waited a few more minutes before I dared to move. I had the files. I had the evidence. I had to get out before anyone realized what had just happened. The elevator ride back to the lobby was quiet. I scanned the room once more, my mind calculating every possible exit strategy. I couldn't let anyone catch on, not yet. But the moment I stepped outside, I knew things were only just beginning. The storm above had calmed, but what was waiting for me ahead was a storm of a different kind. Serena and Miles didn't know it yet, but they had just made a dangerous enemy. And I wasn't going to let them win. I could feel the weight of what I had just uncovered pressing against me as I sat in the cramped, dimly lit loft, staring at the folder I'd grabbed from Serena's office. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, but I had to focus. I turned on my laptop and plugged in the encrypted data drive. The image of Arthur's handwriting, his voice captured in that final recording, was still fresh in my mind. He had known exactly who he was dealing with. I could see it now, the entire betrayal unfolding before my eyes. As I sifted through the documents, my phone buzzed, a message from Finn. I got the metadata from the files you sent. It's got some deep links to someone else, Clara Ewan. She's Arthur's former IP lawyer. She's missing. We need to talk. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Clara Ewan. I remembered her from Arthur's past. Sharp, no nonsense. Someone who could go toe-to-toe with anyone in the corporate world. She had been his trusted legal advisor, the one who handled all of Dagentech's most sensitive intellectual property agreements. If she was missing, this wasn't just about corporate sabotage. This was something much darker. I quickly dialed Finn's number, the phone ringing only once before he picked up. Evelyn, Finn's voice came through the line, low and urgent. Clara's been off the grid for months. Her last known location? A small coastal town. It's not far from here. I can send you the details, but it doesn't look good. Someone's been trying to erase her. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces of this puzzle starting to fit together. If Clara had the original tech transfer contract, the one that Arthur had signed, proof that everything Serena had been doing was fraudulent. Then she was the key to everything. "I'm going to find her," I said, my voice steady. "Get me the address." "I'll leave now," Finn hesitated. "You sure about this? If someone's trying to erase her—" "I don't have a choice," I interrupted. "She's the only one who can clear Arthur's name and expose Serena and Miles for what they've done. I'll be careful. But I need to get to her before they do." There was a pause on the line before Finn spoke again, his tone grim. "All right, I'll send you the location. But keep your head down, Evelyn. This isn't just business anymore. Someone's making sure that people who know too much disappear." "Understood," I said, already grabbing my jacket. "Send me the info. I'll handle the rest." I disconnected the call and quickly scanned through the files on my desk. The images of Clara's last correspondence with Arthur, the contracts, the patents, were marked clearly. She was the person who could confirm everything, could prove that Serena's manipulations were real, and that she was actively working to erase Arthur's legacy. I needed to find her, and I needed to do it fast. The coastal town Finn had mentioned was about 3 hours north, nestled along the jagged cliffs of the coastline, quiet and isolated. As I drove, the storm from the night before had cleared, leaving the air heavy with salt and fog. The winding roads twisted around the hills, and the ocean roared in the distance. The isolation of the place felt fitting, as if it was hiding something. When I finally reached the small town, the atmosphere was eerie. It was late, the streets were practically empty, and the few stores I passed had already closed for the night. I followed Finn's directions to a nondescript house at the edge of town. The place was dark, the windows covered with thick blinds. I parked down the street, careful not to draw attention. My heart raced as I approached the house, every instinct telling me to be cautious. It didn't feel right. The entire place had an air of abandonment, like someone had tried to erase it from existence. I knocked once, then twice, but there was no answer. I tried the door, locked. But I wasn't going to give up that easily. I circled the back, careful not to make a sound. There, behind the house, I found a small, unlatched window. My fingers worked quickly to pry it open. As I slid inside, the familiar smell of dust and old paper hit me, mixed with a faint trace of something stronger, like chemicals. The house was quiet, too quiet. I moved through the living room, the floor creaking under my boots. The place was sparsely furnished, but there were signs of someone having lived here. Bookshelves stacked with legal texts, papers scattered across a desk, and a few framed pictures on the walls. But there was no sign of Clara. I checked the kitchen. Nothing. A few empty dishes, but no sign that anyone had been here recently. My stomach churned. If she was gone, then what had happened? Just as I was about to move upstairs, something caught my eye. On the far side of the room, beneath a pile of old magazines, was a thick leather-bound folder. I approached it cautiously, pulling it out and flipping through it. It was filled with legal contracts, the same ones I'd seen Arthur working on. And then, buried near the back, was a single piece of paper, Arthur's signature, clear as day, the original contract. My pulse quickened. This was it. This was the proof I needed to expose Serena and Miles. But there was something else. A piece of paper tucked into the folder that didn't belong, an old yellowed letter. I unfolded it carefully. It was a note from Clara. "I've hidden everything. If something happens to me, you'll know where to look. But be careful, Evelyn. They've been watching me for months. If they find this letter, they'll find you too." My heart sank. This wasn't just about corporate fraud. This was personal, and Clara knew she was being targeted. I grabbed the folder and rushed out of the house, my mind racing. Whoever had come after Clara wasn't going to stop, and I needed to get back to the city. I had the proof. But I also had a target on my back. As I sped back down the coastal highway, the weight of the letter in my hand, the realization hit me hard. The only way to stop Serena and Miles was to take this evidence straight to the authorities. And that meant I had to play a dangerous game. But I wasn't going to let Arthur's legacy be destroyed. Not after everything we had worked for. The fight was just beginning. And I was all in. The sound of my heels clicking against the cold marble floors of the Federal Intellectual Property Tribunal echoed in the sterile, suffocating hallway. I glanced at the clock on the wall, just minutes before the hearing started. My heart was racing. The stakes were higher than I could have imagined when I first started digging into Serena's operations. This wasn't just about corporate espionage or stolen patents anymore. It was about a massive, coordinated attempt to rewrite the very history of Dogantech and to erase Arthur from it entirely. I walked into the courtroom, the air inside thick with the weight of corporate suits, legal representatives, and federal investigators. At the head of the long, polished table sat the tribunal judges, their faces stern, their eyes scanning the room with detached precision. To their left, Serena and Miles sat comfortably at their side, smug smiles plastered on their faces, like they were already claiming victory. I could feel their arrogance, and it fueled my fire. I could already hear the whispers of the crowd, their gazes flicking toward me as I took my place at the far end of the table. A few knew who I was, old Dogantech engineers, former colleagues who knew how much I had contributed. Most didn't, and I was okay with that. I wasn't here to play nice. I was here to win. Maya Trent, my lawyer and the only person I trusted to navigate this chaos, gave me a small nod from her seat. She was a pit bull in a courtroom, sharp, calculated, and relentless. She had my back through every decision, and she'd been pushing for this hearing for months. Today, it was all coming to a head. We had filed the petition, the official request to freeze Serena and Miles's control over the Dogantech empire. We had Clara's deposition, we had the documents, and we had the truth. I shuffled through my papers, focusing on the case files, as the sound of the tribunal judge's gavel echoed across the room. "We'll begin shortly," the judge said, his voice dry and formal. He barely glanced at us before turning to the clerks. I leaned back in my seat, trying to maintain composure, but my mind was already racing. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. Serena and Miles wouldn't just sit there and let me dismantle everything they'd worked so hard to steal. I could already hear Miles's voice in my head, the cocky tone, the false bravado. He'd try to distract us. He'd try to make me look unstable, make me seem like the outlier in all of this. And Serena? She'd play it cool. She'd stay composed, let Miles do the talking. But I knew her game, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The judge banged the gavel again, signaling the start of the proceedings. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, waiting to see what I'd do. "Miss Sloan, you may begin," the judge said, his tone businesslike. I stood up, facing the room. My voice was steady, calculated, as I began to speak. "Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the tribunal, I am here today to request a suspension of the intellectual property rights currently held by Serena Dagan and Miles Howard. The evidence presented today will demonstrate that they have not only manipulated Dogantech's assets, but also falsified critical documentation to strip rightful ownership from the creators, most notably from the late Arthur Dagan, whose vision was the driving force behind this company." I let the words sit in the air, my gaze shifting between the tribunal and Serena, watching as her smile faltered ever so slightly. "Your Honor, this is not a case of petty corporate squabbles. This is a matter of integrity, of preserving the legacy of the man who founded Dogantech. Arthur Dagan was not just a businessman. He was a visionary. And what Serena Dagan and Miles Howard have done is an affront to everything Arthur stood for." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. I felt Maya's approving glance as I made my case. "I have presented evidence," I continued, "showing that key patents were altered, signed under duress, and in some cases, forged outright. The documents you will see today will show that Serena Dagan and Miles Howard have systematically removed legitimate inventors from their rightful place in Dogantech's history and replaced them with falsified signatures and manipulated records. I will also present a recording of a meeting between Arthur Dagan and Serena Dagan, where Arthur explicitly refused to let Serena take control of his legacy. He knew what she was planning. He knew she would try to erase him, and he fought until the end to make sure the truth was kept alive. I glanced at the file in front of me, tapping it once, knowing it contained the proof. The drive that had been hidden inside the drone, the coded files from Clara, the letters detailing everything. All of it was going to be laid bare. And lastly, I added, my voice rising slightly, I have Clara Ewan's deposition confirming that Arthur Dagan's original contracts that were meant to safeguard his patents, are missing. They were removed, and they were never submitted to any legal body, making the actions of Serena and Miles not just unethical, but illegal. The room went still. the weight of my statement hanging heavy in the air. I felt the eyes of everyone in the room on me, even Serena's. She wasn't smiling now. "We ask," I said firmly, "that the tribunal immediately suspend all rights to Dagentech's intellectual property and place a temporary injunction on any licensing agreements that have been tampered with. Until the full investigation is completed, we believe it is critical to halt any further exploitation of Arthur Doggin's work." I sat back down, my chest tight with the anticipation of what came next. I could feel Maya's support at my side, but the truth was, there was no turning back now. Serena stood, her heels clicking against the floor as she made her way to the front. She had the air of someone who had been through this 1,000 times, unflappable, calm, but I could see the flicker in her eyes. She wasn't as confident as she wanted everyone to believe. "Thank you, Mrs. Sloane," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with a hint of impatience. "While I understand the importance of intellectual property rights, I must clarify a few points. Dagentech is a thriving company, and we've made great strides in Arthur Dagan's absence. We've introduced new technologies, expanded our market presence, and I would like to remind this tribunal that Arthur Dagan himself signed off on all the changes we've made. The patents in question were not forged. They were updated, in line with his vision for the future, a vision we are committed to carrying forward." She glanced at the tribunal members, her eyes wide with feigned sincerity. Evelyn Sloane's claim is nothing more than a personal vendetta, based on her own frustrations and failures with Dagentech. She has no standing in this company. Her attempt to rewrite history is nothing but a distraction. I felt my pulse quicken, the anger rising in me as she spoke. But I didn't react. I stayed calm, knowing that every word she said was a lie. "We ask that the tribunal dismiss Ms. Sloane's petition," Serena continued, her tone unwavering, "and allow us to continue our work, uninterrupted. Dagentech's future is in capable hands." Miles jumped in, his voice oozing charm, as he added, "Arthur Dagan built something remarkable, and we are honoring his legacy every day by advancing the technology he started. This case is simply a distraction, and we respectfully ask for its dismissal." I locked eyes with him. I wouldn't let them win, not after everything Arthur had built. The tribunal looked between us. I could feel the weight of their decision in the air. The next few hours were going to determine everything, and I wasn't backing down. The tribunal hearings were already into their 3rd hour, and I could feel the tension building. My case had been laid out, and I knew the evidence spoke for itself. But as the final witnesses took their seats, I could see the determination in Serena and Miles's eyes. They weren't going to let go of this easily. They'd built their empire on lies, and they were desperate to protect it. Serena's lawyer was up next, a slick, well-spoken man who looked every bit the corporate bulldog. He immediately started poking holes in my case, questioning the validity of Clara's deposition and casting doubt on the authenticity of the recording I had provided. It was standard procedure. He claimed that the signatures on the patents could have been misinterpreted, that the documents could have been updated in line with industry standards, and that there was no concrete proof of fraud. But I knew something he didn't, something none of them knew. Maya leaned over and whispered in my ear, her voice a quiet, steady reassurance. "We're close, Evelyn. Clara's testimony and the digital forensics expert will shut them down. Don't let them rattle you." I nodded, trying to steady my breath, my nerves crawling beneath my skin. The fight wasn't over, but it would be soon. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack, silencing the room. He turned to the tribunal members and nodded, signaling that it was time for Clara's testimony. I felt my heart skip a beat. It was my turn to prove that this wasn't just a corporate squabble. It was fraud, pure and simple. The tribunal room was quiet as Clara appeared via video link. Her image flickered on the large screen at the front of the room, her face worn and tired, but resolute. She had agreed to testify remotely, under tight security, after I had tracked her down in that coastal town. She looked as though she hadn't slept in weeks, but I could see the fire still burning in her eyes. "Ms. Ewan, can you hear me?" the judge asked. Clara nodded, her voice coming through the speakers, a little crackly, but strong. "Yes, Your Honor, I can hear you." The judge's voice softened slightly. "We appreciate you being here. Please tell the tribunal what you know about the events surrounding the patents and contracts associated with Dagentech, and what you know about Ms. Sloane's claims. Clara hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the room as if preparing to face the storm. I worked with Arthur Dagan for over 15 years. I was responsible for managing the intellectual property rights of Dogantech, ensuring that all contracts were legitimate and properly executed. I knew every project intimately, every patent, every legal agreement that was made. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When Arthur passed, I continued working with his estate to ensure that his vision for Dogantech remained intact. But shortly after his death, I began to notice discrepancies in the company's records. Patents had been altered, key signatures, including Arthur's, had been forged, and there were specific projects, most notably Project Chimera, that had been left out of the official records entirely. She paused, her face tightening with anger. I confronted Serena about this. She dismissed my concerns, told me everything was fine, but I knew what I was seeing wasn't right, and when I tried to report it, she threatened me. She said that if I didn't stay quiet, there would be consequences. The room was silent as Clara's words sank in. I felt a surge of relief. The truth was coming out, and there was no way Serena and Miles could spin it now. Ms. Ewan, the judge interjected, can you speak to the authenticity of the patents and documents that Ms. Sloane has presented? Are they indeed the work of Arthur Dagan? Clara took a deep breath. Yes, those patents are legitimate. Arthur signed them, but they were altered after his death. There's no question in my mind that Serena Dagan and Miles Howard were behind the changes. I was the one who originally drafted and filed those patents, and the versions Ms. Sloane has found are not the same. Her words hit like a punch. I watched as Serena's face went pale. Miles looked like he had just been slapped. Serena's lawyer jumped up, trying to regain control. Objection, Your Honor, Ms. Ewan has no direct evidence of this claim. She is simply speculating based on her personal biases. The judge held up a hand, silencing him. Your objection is noted, but Ms. Ewan's testimony will be considered, as it is directly relevant to the case. I felt a spark of triumph. We were on the verge of winning. Clara's voice wavered slightly, but she pushed on. I have the original contracts, the true versions, hidden away. If something happens to me, Ms. Sloane will know where to find them. But the versions Serena and Miles presented to the board were forged, altered to exclude key inventors, and stripped of Arthur's signature. It was like a tidal wave had crashed into Serena and Miles's defenses. Their smug expressions faltered, and I could see the cracks forming in their carefully constructed facades. The digital forensics expert I had hired, who had been reviewing the signatures and patents, had confirmed what Clara had just said. It was over. As Clara's testimony ended, the room fell into a tense silence. I could hear the quiet murmurs of the tribunal members, their eyes shifting to Serena and Miles, as they began to grasp the full extent of the fraud that had been perpetrated under their watch. Miles shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Serena's hands clenched into fists under the table. She was trying to maintain her composure, but the truth was unraveling too quickly. Maya leaned in, whispering, "We've won, Evelyn. They have no way out." The gavel came down again, but this time there was no dramatic speech. The judge simply looked at Serena and Miles and nodded. We'll reconvene shortly to issue a ruling, but based on the evidence presented, it is clear that Dogantech's intellectual property has been manipulated. We are suspending all rights to the patents and digital assets under review. The room erupted in a hushed chaos, but I remained still, letting the victory wash over me. It was done. They were exposed. Serena's face twisted in fury, her eyes shooting daggers at me. Miles, on the other hand, stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor as he bolted from the room, trying to make a quick exit. I wasn't done yet. The tribunal's ruling was only the beginning. Now it was time to dismantle everything they had built and reclaim the legacy Arthur Dagan had fought for. As the session concluded, I made my way out of the room, ready for what came next. But for the first time in months, I felt something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. It was over. Or at least, it was about to be. The ruling came 2 days later, and the weight of it settled over me like a long-awaited exhale. The tribunal's verdict was swift and final. The manipulation of intellectual property, the falsified patents, the forged signatures. It all came crashing down on Serena and Miles. Dogantech's empire was suspended, its rights frozen pending further investigation. Serena was stripped of all authority over the company, and the fraudulent patents were invalidated. The intellectual property was officially returned to its rightful place, as outlined in Arthur's original agreements. But the most satisfying part was the criminal referral that came with it. The federal investigation would now take into account the digital forgeries, corporate fraud, and the multiple counts of manipulation. Serena and Miles were no longer in control. And though it wasn't immediate justice, it was a victory for truth. I stood outside the tribunal building, the weight of the case lifting off my shoulders, my heart still racing from the adrenaline. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the city, and the air felt crisp and cool, like a fresh start. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, expecting another barrage of congratulations or calls from legal contacts. But it wasn't. It was a message from Finn. The feds are moving in. They're going after everything. Serena and Miles are under investigation for financial crimes, and there's talk of them getting arrested soon. But you should know, their accounts are already frozen. A small smile tugged at my lips. The thought of them facing the consequences of their actions felt like the final punctuation in this long, drawn-out battle. It wasn't just about the patents anymore. It was about holding people accountable, about taking down those who thought they were untouchable. I leaned back against the cool stone of the building and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wash over me. The fight had cost me everything: time, energy, pieces of my own life that I'd set aside for too long. But it had all been worth it, for Arthur, for his legacy. When I opened my eyes, I saw Maya walking toward me, her sharp suit and confident stride unmistakable. She gave me a knowing look as she approached. "Well, that's it. It's done," she said, her voice low but with a hint of pride. "Yeah, it is," I replied, nodding. We both stood there for a moment, just taking in the calm after the storm. "I couldn't have done this without you, Maya," I said. "You really came through." She shrugged, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "You did all the heavy lifting, Evelyn. I just helped make sure the legal side stayed sharp. But you got it done. You didn't give up, even when it looked impossible." I gave her a small smile, then looked around the city. There was something liberating about it all. The case was over, the empire was falling apart. And in the end, it wasn't just about what I'd gained. It was about the truth finally coming to light. "Well," Maya said after a beat, "I guess we both know the next step, don't we?" I raised an eyebrow, unsure of where she was going with this. "Take it all down," she said with a smirk. "I know the feds are doing their thing, but there's still one last bit to handle." I hesitated, confused. But then I realized what she meant. "You mean Dogantech's legacy, the patents Arthur created, the ones Serena wanted to bury," I said slowly. Maya nodded. "Arthur's work, his real work, needs to be protected. Now that the dust is settling, you've got the rights. You've earned it." I glanced at the phone in my hand, the digital copy of Arthur's final, unfinished patents and ideas. It was more than a company. It was a revolution in the making. "Let's make sure it's handled right this time," I said, my voice filled with resolve. Maya smiled, her usual sharp edge softened. "I'll make sure it's locked down. Arthur's legacy is in good hands." A few weeks later, I stood at the edge of the Mojave Desert. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the red sand. It felt like the place where everything had begun, where Arthur had first shown me the ropes, where we'd spent countless hours test-flying prototypes and dreaming of the future. I ran my fingers over the small drone prototype Arthur had left me in his will, now fully functional, humming softly in my hands. It was a reminder of everything he'd built, everything he'd believed in, and I wasn't going to let it be buried by greed. A sleek black SUV pulled up behind me, and I turned to see Maya stepping out. Her usually immaculate suit had been replaced by something more practical: boots, cargo pants, and a jacket that matched the harsh landscape around us. "Everything's set," she said, walking up to me, her voice quieter than usual. "The patents are locked down. Everything Arthur created is now part of a foundation that will support independent innovators. I made sure no one can touch it." I nodded. Arthur would have liked that. A legacy that isn't just about making money, but about making something that changes the world for the better. Maya gave me a sideways glance. He didn't leave it to you for nothing, Evelyn. He trusted you to keep the work alive. I'll make sure it lives on, I said softly. I promised him I would. I stood there for a moment, taking in the wide open sky, the land stretching out before me. It was empty, vast, but full of possibilities. In the end, I didn't need the empire. I didn't need the fame. What mattered was keeping the truth alive, Arthur's truth. And as long as I could keep his legacy intact, I was free. A sudden wind blew across the desert, carrying with it the promise of change. And for the first time in years, I felt truly unburdened. As I looked down at the drone in my hands, the message Arthur had left me still echoed in my mind. Truth doesn't need a spotlight, but sometimes it needs a pilot. I smiled, ready for whatever came next.